Hello everyone, welcome back to Let's Play Task Force Admiral. There's not going to be any gameplay in this video, but I'm going to look through the scenario menu here and see what battles there are in the game, because the game has a mix of historical and hypothetical scenarios, specifically from 1942. And I want to see what historical events these align with, as best as I can determine. So let's go into it here. Alright, so looks like there's kind of 4 campaigns thus far in the game. We'll start here with early battles. This covers from December of 41 to April of 42. Now you can't really click on any of these because they're not actually in the demo here now, but it's important to remember that you can only play this game from the American side, so no, you cannot play from the Japanese side. So all these scenarios are essentially from the US perspective, even if the scenario involves a possible hypothetical Japanese operation. So looking at the first one, relieving Wake, December 22nd, 42. It's a historical scenario. This has got to be the aborted US relief of Wake Island, which in fact was on their way to Wake when they turned around by the time the Japanese landings had occurred. And the problem is that they were really slow to even get going and when they were moving, they were really slow to get there because the oiler that they were with could only make 13 knots. And to be honest, they were near Wake when they were just ordered to turn around. They could have just gone ahead with it, but nope, they're like, nope, turn the carriers around. The next one, ambushing Yamaguchi, is on the same day. It's a hypothetical scenario. I'm guessing that this is involving Carrier Division 2, the Hiryu and the Soryu, which were on their way with the Kido Butai back to Japan when they were ordered detached. So under the command of Admiral Tomon Yamaguchi, I'm guessing you ambush him when he arrives at Wake Island to support them. Payback at Tarawa. February 1st, 1942, a historical scenario. This is most likely the U.S. carrier raids on the Marshalls and Gilbert Islands during that time in early February. The next one, the surprise guests of Tarawa on the same day, hypothetical scenario. I'm not sure exactly what this would be. Obviously something to do with the raids on the Marshalls and the Gilberts. Maybe, I don't know, more Japanese units show up there. Next one, turkey shoot off Bougainville. February 19, 1942, historical scenario. I'm not sure what this was. There were operations around Bougainville on February 19th. I'm guessing maybe the seizure of Rabaul or something like that. Because the next one, raiding Rabaul, February 19th, is a hypothetical scenario, and there was a US plan to raid Rabaul using USS Lexington, but again, that essentially kind of got turned around. The next one, skies aflame above Leh, or whatever, how you pronounce it. March 8, 1942, historical scenario. Most definitely the Japanese landings and the subsequent U.S. carrier attack on Leh and Salamaua. They flew over the Owen Stanley mountain range. Next one, Inoue's trump card, the same day, a hypothetical one. I don't know what that would be. It might be like Admiral Shigeyoshi Inoue's 4th Fleet, which did not have any carriers in it. It was mostly just land-based aircraft, and maybe they show up and make the American raid on Leh and Salamaua difficult or something. Anyway, moving on, the Doolittle raid, April 18, 1942. Yes, I think we could all figure out what that one was when they flew the B-25s off, the carriers to hit Tokyo. The next one, Halsey's Dilemma, the same day, hypothetical. I'm not sure. Bearing in mind that the carriers were detected by the picket boats on their way to Japan, they were forced to launch the B-25s like 650 nautical miles from Japan. So maybe this is, what if Halsey continued on with the original plan to have the bombers arrive over Japan and bomb them at nighttime? Maybe that's what it would have been or something. I don't know. Anyway, the next campaign, we fast forward to May of 42, the Coral Sea. So Prelude in Tulagi, May 4th, a historical version of it. The raid on Tulagi, probably by USS Yorktown. Overture in the Louisiades, Lusad? I can't pronounce that. Anyway, May 7th, 1942, another historical scenario. Probably the raid on the Des Moines seaplane base during the time. That was what happened on that day, according to my sources. Here's a playable scenario thus far of Cranes and Patriots, May 8th, 1942. This is most definitely, I think, the main part of the Battle of the Coral Sea. Operation MO, Songs of the Coral Sea, May 6th, 1942. So it takes place before the raid on the seaplane base, another historical scenario. I don't know what this would be. Maybe like it's just a couple days before the Battle of the Coral Sea officially kicks off. So maybe like finding the Imperial Japanese Navy striking force or the support force or the main force or the invasion force or something. It's definitely historical, so. Now we get into the hypothetical scenarios against all odds at Port Moresby, May 6, 1942. Maybe defending Port Moresby against the invasion force, the Japanese invasion force. And then the last one for this campaign, Wake Up Call at Nauru, May 14th, 1942. I'm guessing there were Japanese plans, I think, to invade and seize the island of Nauru because those areas, they had lots of phosphates on them and any of those resources, so maybe you're trying to prevent that. Again, even like I said, some of these things I think take place, in a fictional, alternate universe where the Japanese are doing these scenarios, but again, they're from the perspective of the Americans, so again, if it's largely linked to the Japanese operations, there's going to be some kind of American opposition to them. All right, Fortress Midway. Give you two guesses as to what this campaign entails. Last Stand at Point Luck, June 3rd, 1942. Historical scenario? I have no clue. Point Luck was the U.S. carrier rendezvous point when they were going to surprise the Japanese, so it might be like the initial B-17 or PBY torpedo attacks on the Midway occupation forces. This is it, June 4th, 1942. I'm guessing the Battle of Midway. Kakuta to the rescue, June 6, 1942. Hypothetical one. So let's see. Admiral Kakuta was heading up the Ryujo and the Junyo. And maybe instead of heading to the Aleutian Islands for that operation, he brings them down to Midway to join the four Japanese carriers there. That'd be my guess. Breaking the siege, June 7th. Maybe like opposing the Japanese landings at Midway or something. Alright, next one. Kantai Kessen, June 3rd, 1942. Well, Kantai Kessen is the Japanese decisive battle, so maybe this is like the Battle of Midway in that vein. What if there was a decisive, battle off Midway or something? That was the decisive battle, like the Japanese envisioned. And the next one, Battle Wagons off Midway, June 5th, 1942. Hypothetical. Well, let's see. I'm guessing just the Japanese and US battleships just duke it out during the Battle of Midway. Now, in real life, the battleship Yamato and a number of other battleships were part of the operational plans for Midway. That being said, the Yamato was not actually in the fighting proper. She didn't actually see any action during the battle. She was like 100-some miles behind the carrier force, or like a couple hundred miles. So even though Yamato took part in Midway, she was not in any action. And I think 5 of the operational U.S. battleships at the time were actually back on the West Coast guarding San Francisco as anti-air ships, essentially. So maybe it's like, what if those 5 U.S. battleships were not in San Francisco and at Midway instead, and they duke it out with the Japanese? Again, this is all just kind of speculation. Okay, Watchtower. Yes, Watchtower was the operation to take Guadalcanal, the Solomons. So, and it basically took up the rest of the of 1942, from August to to February of 43. Operation Shoestring, August 7th, 42, historical scenario. Well, I think shoestring is another word for the term for the Allied landings on Guadalcanal. Mikawa and Friends, a hypothetical scenario, August 8th, 1942. Well, August 8th was the Battle of Savo Island, so why that would be hypothetical, I don't know. Maybe it's like, instead of like leaving after he hits the cruisers in off Savo Island, instead Mikawa would have continued on and, you know, made attacks on the transports that were just sitting there. You know, what if Mikawa had actually done that, right? So he was criticized because he sort of, you know, pulled up stakes and left early. So I'm guessing this is one of the few scenarios thus far in the game where that's purely a surface battle. Float planes from Mikawa's force did some scouting, and they dropped flares over the Allied cruiser force at nighttime to illuminate the targets for Mikawa, but that would be largely a surface battle. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Boxers in the Dark, August 24, 1942. I originally thought that this was dealing with the naval battles of Guadalcanal, because the first naval battle of Guadalcanal is often described as like a bar room brawl where someone just shot out all the lights. Basically it was pitch black and all of a sudden everything just started shooting at each other. But no, that was in November. This is August. So August 24th, that was actually the Battle of the Eastern Solomons. So it's definitely not the battles of Guadalcanal. Don't recall that taking place in the dark. I think maybe that's what someone described it as. It's all it's like boxers, you know, swinging in the dark for each other or something. Another carrier-only battle. Don't Tread on Me, September 15, 1942, hypothetical. I don't know. In looking at my research, USS Wasp was torpedoed by the submarine I-19 on that date. She was supporting a reinforcement convoy and actually came fairly close to engaging the Shokaku and Zuikaku during that time, but she did not. Maybe it's like a Tokyo Express run or something? I don't know. Or maybe you're interdicting supplies coming down the slot during the daytime or something. Yeah, I'm not sure. Something to do with the Hornet, obviously. And last but not least, blockade runners off Lunga, October 14, a hypothetical scenario. Let's see, October 14th, that was immediately following the Battle of Cape Esperance, which was an American victory. I think the Japanese were trying to land reinforcements via convoy onto Guadalcanal. And I think that night, they sent the battleships Kongo and Haruna in to bombard Henderson Airfield with nearly like 1,000 14-inch shells. There were multiple bombardments of Henderson Airfield from like destroyers and cruisers, but often the Marines consider that particular night to be the bombardment, as if they were like none other. I think the following day, Allied aircraft did cause some degree of damage to the landing ships, but it wasn't tremendous anyway. But if I recall, that's what happened on that day. Well, that's what I can figure out for these various campaigns here that are in the game so far. So I'm not going to touch the battle generator. I got another video coming up on that one. Let's head to the museum. Hey, we got some Australian units in here. These look like the bare bones model. There don't look to be any textures on them yet. When you play the actual battle generator or the scenario that comes with the beta, the ships have textures on them. So if we go to like Yorktown, yeah, I think these are still like early game models, more or less. Or maybe they're the final ones, I'm not sure. Anyway, so let me talk a little about this. Here, let's look at a battleship while we're at it. The Sodak, South Dakota. Yeah, that is an early model. There's barely any texturing on it at all. So, from my understanding, the developer Dry Dock Dream Games, they were just really, working night and day just to get this demo out, and they've focused heavily on getting the carriers and the air operations working. And let me tell you, it really shows. In fact, this game probably has the best depiction of World War II carrier operations that I've seen thus far, anyway. And the developers mentioned earlier on, has been following this game, that they made this game with an eye for historical accuracy. At this stage, I'd say this game is a far better depiction of carrier air operations and carrier operations in general, at least in World War II, along with air combat, than, say, for instance, sea power. Now, before you jump all over me and bite my head off, let me just qualify a few things. Like, did you really just compare this game to Sea Power? Yes, I did. Let me say this. Task Force Admiral and Sea Power are currently the two prime examples of games out there right now that depict these mechanics. They have aircraft carriers, they have air warfare, and mechanics like that. So, yes, I think it is fair we make this comparison. We can also compare these two games with older games like Battle Stations, or even like Command Modern Operations. But those two particular games are what I would argue on the far end of the spectrum for games like these, right? For war games. Battleship is super arcadey, very easy and accessible to pick up, whereas Command Modern Operations is like super on the end of like the war game, die-hard simulator end. So, and I think Sea Power and Task Force Admiral are kind of nestled somewhere in the middle. As far as I can tell, Task Force Admiral is a little bit more towards the simulator end of it, and Sea Power is kind of more towards the middle. As I said, Battle Stations is really accessible, but the problem is with Battle Stations, and I played those games, they're a complete farce to history. It's ridiculous. Whereas Command is like everything history, but it's really boring to look at. And to be honest, Command is more of an operations simulator. It's not meant as like a to depict granular carrier tactics, because for example, like when you play Command, like the carriers don't have to turn into the wind to launch aircraft. The aircraft don't fly around in a circular pattern. They just kind of mill around above the aircraft carrier before they land. But what Command does really well in terms of carrier operations is sortie rates. They did a lot of research for like making the sortie rates, the arming, sortie rates of aircraft very accurate for the aircraft carriers in Command. So that's what that does really well. But it's not granular, like it's not as focused as Task Force Admiral. And furthermore, Command does not take place in World War II either. It takes place from 1950 onward into the future. Then again, neither does Sea Power. Sea Power specifically takes place around maybe like the 60s to the mid-80s. More so like the 70s and into the mid-80s, but... So, I mean, you were kind of comparing two different things here, right? So, like, Task Force Admiral is specifically focusing on a carrier task force in World War II, and more specifically in the single year of 1942, right? This is not 1943, 44, 45. It's not the 1950s or whatever. So I think in this case, Task Force Admiral can afford that level of detail in this particular game, because it's really just focused on one very specific time period during the war. Sea Power, on the other hand, covers a much broader time period, a couple of decades at least, and with obviously far different weapons and aircraft. It's got that going for it. So in the end, it's different developer with different goals in mind for their games. It's not necessarily fair to make a comparison between the two, but on the other hand, they have similar gameplay styles, you might say. It's just Task Force Admiral is more focused on a specific thing. Now, my point, of course, is not to compare the different time periods and the ships, but rather, let me put it this way. At this point in their development, I would argue that, let me go back to a carrier here. Let's look at the Lex here. I would argue that Task Force Admiral, currently at this point, as of February 2025 that I'm making this, Task Force Admiral has a better depiction of carrier operations and air combat, at least in terms of the behavior of the artificial intelligence in the game, than Sea Power. Now, of course, again, Sea Power features angled deck aircraft carriers, but that being said, without a mod, the vanilla sea power, the carriers don't use all their elevators, and they cannot launch and recover aircraft at the same time as they should be able to. I mean, with Task Force Admiral, these are straight deck carriers, so yes, they can only do one at a time. Other little tiny things, like in Task Force Admiral, the arresting wires, the arresting cables, when planes come down and land on the carrier and trap, there's animation on these cables down here, right? So the hook is catching these wires, and you see the wire, snag it. So, yeah, I mean, that's just a tiny little thing, but yeah, you know what I mean? So there's a different amount of attention to detail here. Now, more importantly, the current artificial intelligent routines for the air combat and sea power are really lacking. It's almost like they're placeholders or something, which they may very well be. I mean, the aircraft combat in sea power is pretty bad. It's not that great. It really needs work. Now, in all fairness, the developers, Triassic Games, are aware of the bad AI. They're trying to work on the AI to make the aircraft a lot better in sea power. But at this point, the award for better AI in air combat goes to Task Force Admiral. Let me put it that way. So, but at the very least, Triassic Games have that on their priority list to fix that. So anyway, Task Force Admiral, this beta just released in late January, but Sea Power has been out for several months now. And already, I would say, Task Force Admiral is appearing to be a far more cohesive game. Now, of course, I say that now, but surface combat in Task Force Admiral could turn out to be just atrocious or something for all we know. But again, these are two different games depicting different eras of warfare and with far different scopes and what they're trying to depict. Sea Power is a lot broader, Task Force Admiral is much narrower, so we should always keep that in mind. Also, I recognize that I am very, very biased here because the Imperial Japanese Navy and the Pacific War is my bailiwick. It's my specific area of historical interest. I'm not really a Cold War historian, so naturally I already favor this game over Sea Power. But again, I don't want to give too much credit to Task Force Admiral. I do enjoy Sea Power, and it's my hope that both these games become a staple of my gaming experience in the coming years. Now, it's also important to note that currently Task Force Admiral does not fully implement surface combat, and nor does it have the mission editor. So we don't see, if we go back, actually, let me exit. Note that here, for example, during what would be operations in the Solomons, we don't see many surface battles. We don't see the Battle of Cape Esperance. We don't see the naval battles of Guadalcanal or Tassafaronga. Yet, anyway. So the developer said that surface combat will eventually be implemented. It is not an afterthought. They are working on it, but they are working heavily on making sure the air combat and the carrier operations work well in the game so far, because I think that's what they're basically trying to model in this game. They have expected the surface combat in Task Force Admiral to be pretty realistic and to be roughly on par with the 1999 SSI game Fighting Steel. I suspect that more scenarios will be added to this, so I think the developers are doing a really good job here so far. I really like what I'm seeing. It's not perfect, but it's what we got so far. It's nice to have a playable slice of the game. If you're wondering what fleet defense is down here, it's where you can actually kind of take control of an aircraft and fly it with a mouse or a gamepad, and all battle stations Midway or Pacific style and fly the aircraft around and actually dogfight with Zeros and shoot down Kates and Vals and all that. So that's what it is. Anyway, that's all I have to say for this video, and we'll continue on with some more gameplay of Task Force Admiral in the future.